do you see parallels between the Cultural Revolution and what's happening today? Because, a lot of people call what's happening with cancel culture struggle sessions.
Well, so this is something that people have made that comparison before, and it creates a lot of controversy because there aren't roving bands of Red Guard killing people yet. But I think
they were the Red Guard, they were literally murdering just people in large numbers.
So the real question is, how does a society get to that point? What breeds that? And so we do need to be vigilant, because if this happened once before in human history, it could happen again.
Well, like how many people were the Red Guard killing?
Numbers of people who died in the Cultural Revolution, it varies a lot.
Probably maybe 15 to 20 like the high end is 20 million as a estimate of how many people died during the Cultural Revolution.
There was no period among these revolutionaries where they knew they were in the Cultural Revolution. It was only with hindsight we looked back and then said, here's where it started.
The Cultural Revolution was a specific campaign by Mao.
Oh, okay.
It was called the Cultural Revolution.
To eliminate the four olds, which was old thought, old culture. I forget all the olds.
I just mean, like, was there a point where Mao was like, okay, today's the day we start, go and kill people?
He was like, today we must start the Cultural Revolution to, basically rectify the culture of the party. So there was an actual start date for that.
And it ended when he died. And people were like...
After a really long time?
Yeah, well, it was
only
10
a decade.
years.
Oh,
About
okay.
a decade. He was
But
old.
a long time.
Yeah, it was. I remember speaking to one Chinese person who was alive at the time, and they said it was basically, we talk about like the 10 years that we went crazy.
I mean, it was really bad. Although in some areas it was worse than others, and by the end, Mao was kind of not doing well, so it kind of petered out. But literally, you had to quote Mao's Little Red Book to be able to buy food. Get
on a bus, you had to say a quote from Mao.
Wow.
Yeah, but I understand why some people see parallels with what's happening in the U.S. today. I think there's a few big differences, and the chief one is that the U.S. government protects freedom of speech, and even if you get canceled on Twitter and kicked off of YouTube, and your books are banned from the publisher, you're not going to be arrested. You're not going to be. There's no legal mechanism to send you to prison.
That's not true. There is. They just lie.
Okay, so but that's
you take a look at the Antifa riots throughout the Pacific Northwest. We just learned there was an investigation that found 31 of 90 had their charges dropped and many dismissed with prejudice, which, according to one expert, this is extremely rare for them to actually do this. Some of these were felony charges where Antifa literally assaulted an officer. Their charges are dropped. Now, when it comes to the out group, which would be these Trump supporters at the Capitol, you have the instance of some people. This is really interesting because I'm seeing journalists say this. The shaman guy with the horns, apparently he argued in court, the cops waved him in. And it's on video. The cops are waving and people are following the cops waving, and then the cops open the door. Not everybody who went in the building were shoving their way through police and fighting with cops. There were many circumstances where the doors were just opened up. Now, I think obviously everybody who went in the building was dumb and it was a huge mistake for these people. But you take a look at how after, 6-7 months of rioting and cities being burned down, and these Antifa people, the vice president was soliciting donations to bail her out. So we can say there's no legal mechanism in a sense, but there is a cultural mechanism that guarantees if you're far leftist and you burn down a city, it is very likely that you will face no cultural repercussions. Or none whatsoever. They're not being targeted by law enforcement as terrorists. They're being, the vice president's raising money. Joe Biden's own staffers were raising money to get them out. But if you're a Trump supporter who was just in D.C., you're this woman, she's a psychological operations officer in the Army. She was simply attending a speech. She's under investigation. One guy was a rapper, he's an artist. His label dropped him for simply being in D.C. when this happened. So that's what's scary to me. We can say, oh, but we have a constitution. Sure, but what happens when the federal government just lies? And then you have the entirety of the establishment Democratic left saying, good. They want to do a commission on these people now. I think it's maybe the fear is perhaps a bit pessimistic, but maybe the fear is that they learn from what these other countries did and how to avoid, falling into certain traps. They don't want to kill people. They want control. They don't want to look like the villains themselves, especially in an age of social media and instant transmission of information. So they use clever manipulation to make sure their political dissidents are stripped, destroyed, and removed. And that's what's happening.
I do think that it is different in the U.S. Like, if the Cultural Revolution happened in the U.S., it could not happen the same way that it happened in China, because we do not have, it's not like
We have guns.
Well, besides that, like, the whole mechanism is like started in China by the state. Like, it's started by the Chinese Communist Party. It's like top down, but like
Also, the cult of personality Mao had, which doesn't
yeah,
exist.
but like,
But
You're saying
But I
there's no
think that-
cult of personality around
but
Biden?
I think that, like, in the U.S., the mechanism is like, if you have these tech companies, if you have like the Democratic Party, or like you have this like cultural mechanism for it that is like a different manifestation, but it could, like, psychologically there are similarities, I would say, and especially in terms of like things like the, you know, reporting on people, like there are things that that could happen with this cancel culture stuff that's going on that could follow like the course of the Cultural Revolution without being a thing that is done by the
bloodbath.
or done by the state, exactly, or like, you know, but it could have like the same, you could have neighborhood watch committees where, you know, or, you know, everybody's looking at whatever, you know, you're pulling up what you said on Twitter 20 years not 20, but you know,
Perhaps we're just not at that stage of what the Cultural Revolution was yet. But we do have, you know, just recently, it was Christopher Wray, I believe it was FBI, saying, you know, domestic terror coming, you know, I don't know if he specifically called out Trump supporters, but I think he said, you know, far right domestic terror is the biggest threat we're facing. You've got the Democrats saying Trump supporters and QAnon, they're claiming that they need to keep these troops surrounding DC with razor wire fences and razor wire and these fences because of these conspiracy theories about Trump's true inauguration. You are getting from mainstream press a narrative over and over and over again of who the evil is, calling for they're calling it the 1-6 commission. They want a 9/11 style commission on what happened at the Capitol. They're acting like it was on par with 9/11, and they're continually demonizing Trump supporters, populist right wingers, conservatives, to the point where, you know, we've mentioned it several times now. Echelon Insights interviewed Democrats. What is, you know, of these things, how would you rate your level of concern? The top concern among Democrats is Trump supporters, white nationalists, white supremacy, and among Trump supporters, or among Republicans, it's illegal immigration, taxation, support for the police, very run-of-the-mill conservative positions. It seems like the narrative we're getting from the mainstream press about how bad and awful the right is in this country is reaching that level where, I mean, people, I think, are ready to burst and go insane. So perhaps it's at the point where you'll see Red Guard going around literally murdering people. But we are getting to that point where I believe it's entirely possible you will see the Democrats come out and straight up say, arrest them all, every single one. Because we're already getting to that point. Nicole Wallace on MSNBC said if they were in a different country, would have blown them up by now with a drone strike. What, wouldn't Mitch McConnell think Trump should be arrested for what he did? We have an article from The Root where they said Republicans are enemy combatants, that we must treat as enemy combatants. The Root in 2018, according to Newswhip, was the #1 publication on the left. Now, the right got substantially more engagements, but they were still #1. What happens when you have prominent Democratic politicians, people like Ocasio-Cortez saying, Ted Cruz, you tried to get me murdered. And they're telling this to people over and over again. Where do we go in a year? Perhaps right now we're saying, oh, but in the Cultural Revolution, they were called upon by the party, by the political figures to go and do these things. And it's like, okay, well, maybe in a year they do that. Maybe in 2 years, 3 years. All I know is right now I'm constantly being told by the press how Trump is an insurrectionist who tried to overthrow the United States government. And YouTube has deleted every iteration of his speech from CPAC. This level of tribalist demonization isn't stopping. It's escalating. It's getting worse. And it seems to me like we are dangerously close to this point where the hysteria reaches this level. Perhaps we have a president in Joe Biden who he's already failing his first test in the migrant crisis. The left is outraged over his migrant detention centers for children. The right is outraged over his releasing of COVID-positive patients, COVID-positive illegal immigrants into Texas, as well as shutting down Trump's border wall. So now you've got both sides angry with him. He didn't get the stimulus checks out. Are we potentially looking at a pathetic and failed leader who causes widespread, demoralization among even moderates in this country that results in a Donald Trump running again in 2024 against a Kamala Harris who does not have the charisma to win? Trump ends up getting a decisive but slim victory, And then you have all of that conditioning over 4 years of the demons, of the insurrectionists. Trump finally completed his insurrection. He took the country over. We must go. We must purge. We must stop this. Or perhaps it goes the other way. Trump becomes president and says they're the bad guys. They're the ones trying to subvert it. Like, the hyperpolarization is getting just that scary to me.
Well, democracy is very fragile. And, you know, you were mentioning the commission making the comparison to 9/11. Well, what's the lesson of 9/11? The government used terrorism to create the Patriot Act, which was really more about making the government more powerful and taking away the rights of the American people.
I mean, it's about power and control, and what you kind of just described was a struggle session, essentially.
And so this is where people need to learn from history and see the patterns. Are these actual threats that are being discussed, or is it just somebody creating that opposition that they need to have the dialectical conflict?
Well, that's it. The struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something to struggle against.
There's an interesting book that talks a lot about this sort of thing that I think you're talking about. It's called How the Specter of Communism is Ruling the World. It makes some interesting points. Well, people can read that themselves and draw their conclusions. But it looks at history, and you do see, you know, there are people who learn from all of these tactics that have been used for control. And people who want control, they're not idiots. They look at what has worked and what hasn't worked and refine. The Chinese Communist Party is a much more refined Soviet Union. They're not making many of the same mistakes the Soviet Union did because they learned from them. That's why the Chinese Communist Party is still here.
Yeah, they constantly talk about Gorbachev and how nobody can be a Gorbachev, basically.
Remember when people thought she would be Gorbachev?
I remember there was an event held in D.C. A bunch of Trump supporters were protesting against massive multinational billion-dollar corporations that were suppressing speech, political speech in the U.S. The Trump supporters were protesting and targeting billionaires. Antifa showed up and physically attacked them. It's interesting that you have this demonization for the populist right. It's the elites. It's the establishment. For the populist left, it's the populist right. And I wonder if that's just the convenient tool of the establishment to say, get these people to attack them because they're attacking us, using this idea of the struggle, this conflict between factions, to make sure nobody actually goes after them. If they keep doing that, well, eventually using Trump supporters, conservatives, and populist right-wingers as your scapegoat will result in such extreme hyperpolarization that people start getting killed. We've already seen with the riots over last year, I think there was 19 official deaths caused by the riots. And then there were, I believe, 11 or 12, about 12 peripheral deaths just out like as a result of the rioting. Some people died for certain reasons. But then we also had that guy in Portland who took two in the chest from that Antifa guy with he had the Black Lives Matter tattoo on his neck, the revolution fist, and he shot him twice in the chest.
When you say riots, you're talking about the mostly peaceful protests.
Yes,
right?
Yes, where buildings were on fire and destroyed, and over $2 billion in insurance payouts, not even the total cost of damage that we saw, and the vice president and president supporting those actions. You want to know something absolutely insane? Andrew Cuomo, there's a new report coming out that his administration instructed the health department to obscure the amount of people who died in nursing homes as a result of their policies. On March 25th of last year, Cuomo he announced this policy to send COVID patients into nursing homes. Nursing homes resisted, saying this will introduce the virus into the most vulnerable populations. They said, so what? 15,000 people died. Cuomo covered it up, and that is confirmed. One assemblyman has said it's a coordinated criminal conspiracy. I've said send the guy to prison. Andrew Cuomo still enjoys a 65% approval rating and a 60% favorability rating among Democrats. When you have that level of, he's been accused of harassing women. 3 women have stepped forward. And even prominent Democratic, like left-leaning liberal type figures in the media are criticizing him, saying he should resign. Democrats are saying he should resign. It is now being reported by mainstream left, right-wing publications. He killed these people. He covered it up. The Democrat voter still favors him 65%. So when you have things like that, it says to me like tribalism owns everything. You could have, quite literally, when Donald Trump said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, he wasn't kidding.
That's a good point. Yeah, tribalism, it is a tool of dictators. It's the less we see each other as fellow humans, that actually have more in common than we do differences, that gets easily used when we start to just see the other, the enemy.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.